Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Thanks so much for being with us here today. Quick programming note. This is one of those weird days in which we're going to kind of have to go out of order here a bit. I'm going to try not to be too bait and switchy once the show begins, but some of the traditional benchmarks for our show are actually going to happen at slightly different times today. I'm happy to welcome back Mike Griffith to the program. We'll do that actually at the end of our program today. Still plenty of comments, still plenty of chances for you to interact. And we'll sort of begin today with some pretty provocative statements that some of the media have recently said about some of the Georgia stars, running backs, quarterbacks. It's kind of all in the mix here as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, gets ready to begin right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think it is safe to say that Georgia freshman running back James Cook has been one of the popular subjects on message boards over the course of the last couple of weeks, and unfortunately it's kind of, I guess, for a negative reason. There was some concern amongst a lot of Georgia fans that Cook didn't show up on campus when a lot of the other summer-arriving incoming freshmen did, and we've obviously asked Jeff Sintel about that a ton here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I know Jeff has spoken about that on his own broadcast, and he's written about it at the Sintel Intel as well, and the one thing that Jeff has said over and over again is that he sees no reason for UGA fans to be concerned with James Cook. So for me, like I do on all subjects, I'm going to take Jeff Sintel at his word here and assume that everything's going to be just fine with Georgia running back James Cook. We don't have to talk about late arrivals here, in other words. We can talk about what Cook's actually going to be like once he gets on the field, practicing for the first time this summer and maybe playing in some games for the first time this fall. With that in mind, there is someone in the media who I believe had said something pretty provocative about Georgia freshman running back James Cook and the impact he could make not only for Georgia, but in comparison to freshmen around the rest of the SEC and freshmen all around college football. Joan Neeson's the writer here for Sports Illustrated. What Joan writes about are the potential immediate impact freshmen for the upcoming season. One of only two SEC names on the list is Georgia freshman running back James Cook. Here's a small piece of what Joan wrote for SI. She says, Florida State fans and South Florida natives know James Cook is Dalvin Cook's brother. You may remember Dalvin Cook as a former star for the Seminoles. Joan Neeson goes on to write that Georgia fans now know him as one of the best candidates to help replace the duo of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. James Cook has a similar physical profile to his older brother as a college freshman, to also go along with astonishing speed. And we have seen some examples of that astonishing speed that Joan Neeson writes about in terms of kind of how he's performed in the sort of end of high school season track and field stuff down there in Florida. He has really drawn rave reviews for how fast he is, and obviously there's even been some whispers that maybe he's even put on a few pounds here, already kind of adding to that muscle profile that's necessary to succeed as a running back at the college level. Overall, though, I think what Joan Neeson writes here for Sports Illustrated is certainly very interesting, and I have to admit, probably a bit unexpected. I'm not surprised necessarily to find a Georgia name on this list. I think there's potentially a few immediate impact freshmen for Georgia here in 2018. As much as I like James Cook and as much as I think that he has a chance to have a great career at UGA, I'm not quite sure I would necessarily put him in that category of potential immediate impact freshman for Georgia in 2018. For a lot of reasons, most all of them really good for Georgia. Although it is worth pointing out here, though, that Jeff Sintel, the DawgNation recruiting insider, who we speak to a lot here on DawgNation Daily, you know, I mentioned off the top of the program a moment ago, he certainly agrees that Cook has a chance to eventually shine at UGA, along with the other freshman running back Zamir White. One of the things that Jeff Sintel has said in the past, and maybe we do see some evidence of this in 2018, that this duo of freshmen, White and Cook, one of the things they have going for them, even in comparison to two all-time greats like Sony Michel and Nick Chubb, is the presence of a much better offensive line for Cook and White, both in 2018 and beyond, than maybe Chubb and Michel ever saw. In fact, here's how Jeff Sintel recently explained that on an edition of DawgNation Daily.
Well, if you look at the ratings and the pure talent that's going to be coming to Athens, I think everybody there is in the same weight class, in the same kind of category. But the main thing that will be different for both Cook and even Zamir White is, remember, John Theus was the only five-star that guys like Chubb and Michel got to run behind. There could be a line formed in Georgia in the next 2 years where a bulk of the carries for both of those young men might come behind a line that includes 3 five-star prospects. And I'm not even counting the freshman wire-to-wire starter, Andrew Thomas.
So you hear Jeff Sintel there talking about the potential future of both James Cook and Zamir White. But what if we pivot the conversation back to where it was at the beginning, James Cook or Zamir White? Well, Joe Neeson at Sports Illustrated seems to think it's more likely Cook than White here this season, and I think this is almost solely due to the fact that Zamir White was injured. In fact, Joe Neeson wrote this a bit at Sports Illustrated, but White was injured near the end of his senior season there in high school last year, and I think conventional wisdom, and for the national writers, they're obviously not following Georgia as closely as many of you are who are watching or listening to the show right now. They can only operate on conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom would suggest that players injuring their knee in one season are still not 100% the following season. But the people closest to Zamir White, and we've had people relay these stories right here on DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza, the people closest to Zamir White would say that there's nothing conventional about his injury recovery right now, that it's almost superhuman, much the same way that maybe Nick Chubbs could have described as having been after his injury in the 2015 season. So Joe Neeson can maybe be forgiven for maybe underestimating Zamir White's ability to recover from injury and be an impact freshman. And obviously, if that grows for him, then that's maybe less of an opportunity for James Cook, who probably rates as just a little bit lower down the trough in terms of running backs from the class of 2018. But it's not only that's an issue for James Cook to deal with here this season. It's also the other depth that Georgia has when it comes to the running backs here. James Cook may go on to be a star at Georgia. I hope he does. I know a lot of Georgia fans feel the exact same way. But he's not the only potential star from this running back core. I mean, after all, there are a couple backs that have been on the Georgia roster for a while who are waiting their turn. And for James Cook to get on the field and get big yards and have big productivity here in 2018, he's going to have to pass up a guy like, say, Elijah Holyfield, for instance. And that's going to be really hard to do. Holyfield's a guy under different circumstances that would have probably already gotten a lot of carries at Georgia. Where Holyfield for a different SEC team, he may be the guy on the cover of the media guide. At Georgia, though, he's just now getting his chance, but there's plenty of indications that he's ready to do a lot with that opportunity and a lot with that chance. In fact, here's how Kirby Smart spoke about Holyfield back during the spring.
He's a workhorse. He's a tough guy. He's physical. He's extremely competitive. I thought he grew up his second year because he contributed on special teams. His first year, I don't think he knew how to contribute on special teams. But he's developed as a special teams player. He gained confidence through the special teams, and now that's carried over into his offense and carrying the ball. Like you said, he got some carries last year and some mop-up duty. But he's a physical, tough guy, one of my favorite competitors out there. He's got to pass pro better. He's got to work on it, and that's been a big emphasis for him. But I'm excited to see where he goes. He's had some really good, tough runs this spring.
I think we would all agree that excited is not a word that Kirby Smart throws around lightly. If he says he's excited about Elijah Holyfield, I think he probably means it. And if Kirby Smart means it, there's probably good reason for it, which obviously excites UGA fans. And if you want to keep this Elijah Holyfield and James Cook comparison going here for a moment, there's one thing that Holyfield obviously has at his disposal that Cook currently doesn't have at his. It comes down to experience, and as Chip Towers has explained before, right here on DawgNation Daily, experience is something that Elijah Holyfield could definitely use to his advantage this season.
I think Elijah Holyfield's going to be a guy that you hear from in some shape or form as a tailback/running back this year. And I think definitely early in the year, because there's a couple of things that are very important about Elijah Holyfield. Number one is he knows what he's doing now. That's not a small thing. There's no question that Zamir White and James Cook, the two signees that Georgia are bringing in, are exceptional athletes. And there's a lot of things you can do at the running back position. But it does take a while. What Georgia does offensively to master what your job is over and beyond just, taking a toss sweep right or left. I mean, they just do so much more nowadays in pass protection and catching the ball out of the backfield. All that is part of the position now. I think Elijah Holyfield and Brian Harrigan, to the same extent, are just so much more ready early in the season to get on the field.
I mean, I'm over the moon excited about the long-term future of James Cook, but in the immediate present, I guess I should say, in the immediate present, I have to admit that Chip Towers' more sort of tempered evaluation of the running back situation probably makes more sense to me than Joe Neeson, who seems to be really excited about the potential of James Cook. I think the experience really helps Holyfield get on the field earlier and more, and maybe be the guy getting those lion's share of the carries in the beginning of the season, especially if Zamir White's still working his way back to full health. But, the other comparison you got to mention here, if you want to talk about these sort of Holyfield versus James Cook evaluation, is the one thing that we've already seen some from Holyfield that we're going to look to see from Cook once he starts practicing and eventually starts playing, is that brute physicality. It's one of the hallmarks of what Elijah Holyfield does. He's proud to call this part of his repertoire of skills. In fact, he made no bones about that when he spoke with the media back during the spring.
They always say physical. That's the thing I get the most. I mean, I think it's the way we play at Georgia, and it's the way, our program is built. So I enjoy carrying that out on another team.
I like Elijah Holyfield right there. They always call me physical. That's the word they say the most. I enjoy carrying that out on the other team. And James Cook may be one day a great running back at Georgia, but that mindset from Cook is going to be necessary, the same one Elijah Holyfield has right there. Will Cook come to Georgia and embrace the physical elements of the running game the way that Elijah Holyfield has, and the way that he's been sort of biding his time, waiting in the wings for his chance to show that in kind of a featured role with the Georgia running game this fall? I think it remains to be seen. There is a lot to like about James Cook, in other words, but when you start thinking about the Georgia running game here for 2018, and this is good news for Dog fans, when you start thinking about that depth, boy, it's hard to imagine which of these guys is going to step up and sort of earn playing time over the other. More than anything, this summer during practice and in those early games, it's just going to be a really fascinating subplot to watch unfold. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, we're presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're available to you on video. DawgNation Facebook page at 10 a.m. DawgNation YouTube page right there at the same time, live every day. You can also catch us on the DawgNation Twitter feed. We love it when you listen to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We're there live every day at 12 p.m. in the Classic City and in podcast form. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just thanks so much for catching up and being with us here as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. And speaking of Marco's Pizza, we love having them as a part of our program each and every day, and we love the special offer they have for you. They invite you to say hello primo with 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. That is an unbelievable deal on authentic Italian pizza with that Gianmarco family recipe sauce, the 3 cheeses melted, blended together right there on top of the authentic Italian crust. It is a really great way to spend the summer, especially on some of these rainy nights, like it was last night. It was pouring down rain in my house. Just call Marco's, have them delivered to you, and you can be enjoying a great pizza at a great price. You can go to marcos.com to find out more about that. Later on today, we're going to welcome in Mike Griffith to the program, our brand newest member of DawgNation.com here. We'll get some insight on the Georgia Bulldogs from him. Really looking forward to have Mike on the show today. Before that, pretty wild quote out there on the internet that I thought we should at least spend a minute or two talking about today. A Bleacher Report has got a quote from an anonymous NFL scout about Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm and ex-Georgia quarterback Jacob Eason. This is pretty fun. This is what the scout tells Bleacher Report. That kid at Georgia, that's Jake Fromm, and the one that left, that's Jacob Eason, are legit dudes. They could go 1 and 2, and they were at the same school. Now, when he says 1 and 2, what he means is first and second in the NFL draft. He's projecting ahead to the 2020 draft there. They could go first and second, and they were at the same school. Those are the quarterbacks to watch when you start looking ahead to future NFL drafts. Fascinating stuff from the NFL scout there when it comes to Bleacher Report. And, I think obviously over the course of time, it remains to be seen how true that ends up being. We know a bit about what Fromm is right now. We'll find out, I guess, as soon as 2019, what Jacob Eason might be for Washington. I certainly hope he does well out there. I think many UGA fans join me in feeling that way. I think many UGA fans also join me in thinking he probably will do well. I mean, I think the one thing we all remember about last season was that liking Fromm didn't mean you had to dislike Jacob Eason. That this NFL scout tells Bleacher Report what a unique situation. You had maybe the 2 best quarterbacks in a future NFL draft on the same team at the same time. Wow, that's really weird. And it was kind of a weird situation. And I think that Kirby Smart, to some degree, should be commended for how he navigated those, frankly, pretty rough waters. And obviously, if you're Jacob Eason, even though publicly he always said the right stuff. He did. I mean, he always publicly said the right stuff. Privately, he had to be irritated about losing his job, but you had to pick one guy over the other. And once Eason got hurt and Fromm started playing well, what other choice did Georgia ultimately really have? It's actually kind of ironic that really just a couple of weeks ago, Kirby Smart was talking about this. He was on the sports radio station up in Birmingham, or over in Birmingham, WJOX, and they, as you might imagine, would have asked him, hey, you went through something last season at the beginning of this year when Jacob Eason got hurt against Appalachian State that most coaches are never going to go through. What was it like for you? What were you thinking about when you went through all of that? And in keeping in mind that maybe both these guys one day become first-round picks, it makes Kirby's answer all the more interesting. Here it is.
I think at the time I was worried about App State, who had a really good defense and had played Tennessee really well the year before, and we were very concerned about their team. So it gave us a little momentum in that game, and I thought, well, this young guy came in and did a good job. But Jacob was going to get every opportunity to come back, and I thought he did. But I thought that Fromm kept improving, and that's what kind of put us over the top in the end, is the fact he got better game to game.
I think about, coaches and almost in sort of presidential terms sometimes, and that's not really like a peacetime decision, right? I mean, that really sort of puts your feet to the fire very early in your second year in terms of making a tough choice. It's very easy to be a coach, especially a young one, when everyone's healthy. But when an injury goes down to a high-profile player like Jacob Eason, as a coach, how do you respond? And how do you set your team up to respond? Well, in the case of the Fromm-Eason situation from a year ago, I don't think it could be disputed that Kirby Smart handled that about as well as anyone could. And we'll see if Jacob Eason goes on to the great success that we think that he might be able to have at the University of Washington. And Georgia fans in particular be watching for the success that Jake Fromm has here at Georgia. I think one thing's to be clear, though. When you've got draft scouts saying these kinds of things about Jake Fromm, the notion that he's merely a game manager, that conversation now seems pretty passé. All right, it's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. A lot of fun coming up. For now, let's once again get ready to welcome in Mike Griffith right here to DawgNation Daily. And for those of you watching us on video, don't want to bait and switch you on that. As I explained off the top of the program, we're having to go a little bit out of order here today. So we're going to catch up with Mike a little later on. But one of the things that gives us a chance to do is get some of your comments a little early. So we'll take some comments now. We'll do some of our regular broadcast stuff later. We'll have Mike Griffith here coming up in a few minutes, too. So it'll be all the same stuff you've come to expect from DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and just sort of a slightly out-of-order version. This is sort of the Picasso painting version of DawgNation Daily, if you will. Also, one more piece of business to take care of before we kind of dive into these comments. I've been telling you for the last couple of days that I've had a little bit of an issue with my Facebook comments. And I've been watching this closely here on DawgNation Daily and here on SEC Country Live as well. And the best I can tell, and this is tedious, some of you don't even care, but the best I can tell is they're just not sort of posting in order anymore. So I'm going to hopefully use my mouse to try to sort of toggle back and forth between a lot of these a lot. And we'll see if that makes it go a little bit better here. Let me say hello to Yarnell Color, who joins the show a little late, but glad to have us here. Bobby Weatherington having some fun with my my Picasso reference there. That's probably a little bit more sophisticated of a reference than I should be making there. Sean DeBerry says, hey, BA, where can I get a squirrel like y'all's? So this is our official, or I guess sort of unofficial, DawgNation Daily mascot. This is Eddie the Blind Squirrel, in reference to Dan Mullen, who a few months ago, upon taking the Florida job, goes to one of those GATOR, like public speaking engagements, rubber chicken circuit type deals. And he kind of goes out there and, took a little bit of a shot at Georgia, saying even a blind squirrel can find a nut once, referencing Georgia winning the SEC championship last season. So obviously here on this show, that's sort of proclaimed as our mission to remind folks that a good Georgia fan's a Gator hater first and foremost. It didn't take us much to jump on that. So this is Eddie here. I'll give you the backstory on Eddie. Eddie was actually a stuffed animal in my son's room. Now, my son occasionally watches the show, and sometimes he says, Daddy, will you bring my squirrel back? And, of course, I say now, listen, this squirrel belongs to the audience now. This squirrel's been sort of deputized into a higher sense of duty, a higher calling, but my son doesn't necessarily feel that way. He also kind of wonders why I have a blindfold on him. He doesn't completely understand all of that. But it's always been a dream of mine to maybe one day make some Eddies and send them out to everybody. But I probably better not bite off more than I can chew when it comes to that kind of stuff. Also on Facebook, Matthew Dills, and so far the mouse is working a little bit better here. So far on Facebook, Matthew Dills says, no disrespect to Eason or the scouts' prediction, but at game speed, all the big attributes he has seemed to go out the window. That may be true, Matthew, but I wouldn't put it past Eason to use this time watching last year. Now, I talked to Eason about, not to name drop, but I talked to Eason about this at the Rose Bowl a season ago. I did talk to him about the notion of, watching for a year. Is there value in watching? And listen, he was in that mode of always saying the right thing, always kind of, tiptoeing very carefully around what was a little bit of a touchy subject. But he did say in L.A. Back in January that he did learn some things from watching, not just watching Fromm, but just sort of watching football in general. I mean, if you're a guy like Jacob Eason, you've been the starting quarterback for every team you've ever been on since you were like, the fourth grade or something like that, or however long, Eason's played football. This is the only time in his life he's ever truly watched for a while. And watching big-time defenses like the ones that Georgia played a season ago, I think that Eason probably learned something from that. I think he gets to go be tutored by Chris Peterson and the staff up there at Washington for a year or two. That's thought to be a pretty good staff in that regard. He'll be watching Jake Browning, who's kind of a Heisman contender for the Huskies. Remember, he can't play by transfer rule here this season, forced to watch once again. I think there's a chance here that that Eason uses that 24 months off to make himself a better quarterback by the time he plays again. I mean, my ultimate opinion on this is I think that Jacob Eason, had the injury never happened, I think Eason could have gone on to be a good quarterback at Georgia. But I have to admit, I don't think that Eason would have performed as well last season as Jake Fromm did as a freshman. I think that Fromm's freshman year was far and away better than Eason's freshman year was, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Fromm's freshman year was also better than Eason's sophomore year was going to be. But it may turn out that being second best in comparison to Jake Fromm is no slight against Jacob Eason whatsoever. All right, let me pop over here to YouTube here for a moment, and if you're just joining us, we are doing comments a little early today. We're kind of going out of order a bit with our regular broadcast. We're going to dive back into that in just a moment. We'll welcome in Mike Griffith here to the program, but taking a lot of your comments right now. Joe Brummel over on the YouTube comment section says that Eason will be successful in the Pac-12. He didn't come to Georgia to learn pro style. He came to Georgia to learn pro style. Unfortunately, it didn't work out as well, and he had hoped. But I wish him nothing but success in the Pacific now. Yeah, listen, I think that Eason, and I've got no reason to tout this if I didn't really feel this way. I think that Eason ought to be treated like, some of y'all like to use the phrase DGD. I think that Eason ought to be considered a DGD for any time to come. And I'm not telling you ought to root for Washington when he plays, but be a little happy if he does well. I think that's something that Georgia fans probably ought to do, because Eason could have derailed last season for Georgia. He could have. He could have pouted. He could have whined. He could have gone public. I mean, we've already seen both camps from the Alabama side go public in just this offseason alone. And Jacob Eason didn't do that. Jacob Eason kept quiet, said all the right things. When it came time to transfer, he bolted back home to go to Seattle and play for Chris Peterson and the Huskies. He did right by Georgia in a way that I don't think you can guarantee either of the two Alabama quarterbacks are going to do for Nick Saban. From that standpoint, I think Georgia fans have a bit of a gratitude owed towards Jacob Eason. Michael D. Says he's migrated from the Facebook feed over to the YouTube feed. And, Michael, I think a lot of people feel that way. I am somewhat platform agnostic. I want people to do what they like. If you like the radio show, listen to that. If you like the podcast, listen to that. If you like the Facebook, to watch that, then by all means. Or if you like watching on YouTube, I just want people to go where they're happy. But the one thing I have noticed is there are a lot of people who have seemingly been happier migrating from Facebook over to YouTube. So if you're a Facebook watcher and you want to, make that choice, I get nothing extra from you doing that. But as just sort of a one friend to another, some people seemingly are happier when they do that. DSGB27 says, anything new on Demetrius Robertson? I have nothing new to offer on D-Rob. I also will admit I didn't get a chance to watch Jeff last night. Maybe some of y'all watched that. Maybe he said something new on his Wednesday night broadcast about that. We'll have Jeff again on our show tomorrow. We'll ask him about it again. But for me, the D-Rob thing seems somewhat frozen where it is. So Kevin Blackman also on YouTube kind of referencing that the chat's been kind of messed up by Facebook. Yeah, I'm glad to hear somebody else echoing that too, because it is very, very different for me now. I'm sort of glad to hear about that. Cole Roster on Facebook says that the Pac-12 is going to be a little bit easier for Eason because of the lack of sort of elite defensive backs. It is a different kind of defensive league. Now, there are clearly some good Pac-12 teams. I mean, I think of Stanford typically as the kind of program that would sort of fit well in sort of a southern, style of football. But there are, I'm not going to lie to you, there are, plenty of Pac-12 teams who don't bring that same level of physicality to the table. USC typically has elite 4- and 5-star talent. UCLA has at least its share of elite 4- and 5-star talent. Stanford has some of that on the offensive side of the ball and sort of an overall level of physicality because David Shaw is just a really good coach. But there's also a handful of much easier Saturdays too. There is no denying that. All right, so we're gonna get back and we're gonna get back into our regular broadcast here for a moment. It is Mike Griffith, our brand newest member of DawgNation.com, coming up in a few minutes. We'll also do some more comments here too as a part of our Dog Day Q&A coming up in a moment. I want to sort of get in more into the Jake Fromm conversation on this. A lot of you kind of weighing in on the Eason part of this in the comments section. It's sort of interesting to see. We'll do the from part of this coming up. I also want to do an SEC through. In fact, let's go ahead and roll with the SEC through right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Always fun to have Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, and really excited about having Mike as a part of DawgNation.com. And, over the course of the next couple of days, I think we may be on this subject here of underrated guys in the SEC. And, J.R. Reed, the Georgia safety, is getting some of that conversation as being underrated. We'll sort of examine, just how underrated J.R. Reed really is. I did want to look, though, at some of the other SEC names that ESPN mentioned. They recently came out with their piece for their preseason top 25, and this is sort of like a staple benchmark piece of content for ESPN.com during the offseason. They look at their preseason top 25, and they sort of address an issue for each of these teams. They end up doing it about once a week, kind of getting ready for the start of the season. And the latest sort of issue to be highlighted is the underrated player for each of these teams. For Georgia, it is J.R. Reed. We'll do more of the Reed stuff kind of at another time. For some of the other players, though, and the other teams, here's where things kind of get interesting. For Alabama, the most underrated player is the running back Damian Harris. Now, chew on that for a moment, that Harris, who I think gets plenty of attention, I think could be talked about in the Heisman Trophy conversation, from an ESPN standpoint is still viewed as underrated. I sort of know where this comes from. It's obviously based in the fact that so much of the offseason conversation is centered around Tua or Hurts, and what happens is one of these guys transfer, and there's been a lot of attention paid to quarterbacks for a program that has, for the most part, been about power running game behind big offensive lines, and Damian Harris seems to fit into that discussion. It's something for Georgia fans to think about if you want to fast forward ahead to December and a potential rematch with Alabama from last year's national championship game. But you've still got a load to deal with when it comes to the Alabama running backs. But for my taste, I don't believe that Damian Harris is the best running back for Alabama. I believe that might be Najee Harris, who will be a sophomore here this season. We shall see, but kind of an interesting take on Alabama. It is also a running back from Mississippi State that gets the nod for being their most underrated player here for 2018. It's Aris Williams. And I think the issue here for Mississippi State, with its running game, Williams in particular, Georgia doesn't play Mississippi State in the regular season, but Georgia may be rooting for Mississippi State at some point in time to knock off an Auburn or, knock off, any SEC West team, I guess. And one of the things that you'll be sort of keyed in on when you look at Mississippi State is it may need its running backs this year, because I do not know about these wide receivers. I just don't know that you can classify any Mississippi State wide receiver as, quote, underrated, and I think Mississippi State could use a wide receiver to step up. Nick Fitzgerald is the darling of many in the media. There's an element of Fitzgerald that I just don't see what the rest of the media does. After all, I saw Fitzgerald come to Sanford Stadium a year ago in the building when he really seemed overwhelmed by what the Georgia defense threw at him. So can you be one of the best quarterbacks in the country if you were sort of manhandled that day at a time in which Fitzgerald's stars seemed to be on the rise? And for the most part, Georgia kind of put that to an end. And there's no fault in being sort of handled by the Georgia defense necessarily, but I'm skeptical of Nick Fitzgerald, at least in comparison to some of the national conversation here. He may not get a lot of help from his wide receivers. For example, one of the guys that may have been the leading receiver, Stephen Guidry, he may not even be eligible for the team. There's been some sort of weird conversation coming out of Starkville on that. They may need to lean on Aris Williams. They better hope that he is truly underrated. I have to admit, the name that shows up here for Auburn on ESPN.com's list of underrated players, their preseason top 25, I have to admit this probably feels like an underrated player, and it probably does feel like the kind of name that the nation's going to know more about by the end of the year. I'm talking about the defensive lineman Dontavius Russell, who Georgia fans will remember as a one-time UGA commit. I do think one of the real strengths for Auburn, and I do think one of the things that Georgia's going to have to deal with at least once when they play in Athens in November, and then who knows if there's a rematch again in December, but at least once, I think the issue to deal with for Georgia when it comes to Auburn is that defensive line. We'll talk a lot about Jarrett Stidham. We'll talk a lot about the tug-of-war between Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey for control of the Auburn offense. But it's that Auburn defensive line that feels almost like a sure thing for me. Derek Brown, maybe people already know. Russell from out of Carrollton, people may know more about. I think Kevin Steele's got something pretty good up front with that Auburn defense. It's probably worth paying attention to. Texas A&M linebacker Terrell Dotson shows up as the Aggies' underrated player. Texas A&M near the bottom of the ESPN preseason top 25. I have no idea if this will play out for Dotson or not, but I do think it fits into the narrative of what Jimbo Fisher's trying to change about Texas A&M. This was a, if you'll allow me to say it, soft, finesse-based football team under Kevin Sumlin. They want to be more serious, more nuts and bolts, more physical under Jimbo Fisher. Linebackers like Dotson give him a chance to do that. And then I'll mention one more name here. Brian Edwards, the wide receiver from South Carolina. He's sort of the other sort of partner to Deebo Samuel there in that South Carolina wide receiver core. Y'all know that I'm very high on Samuel. I think he's one of the SEC's best players. I think Edwards is no slouch on the other side, though. When you think about playing South Carolina, and Georgia does it in week 2, I think dealing with those South Carolina wide receivers is going to be one of the real challenges, not just for Georgia, but for everybody. But for Georgia in particular, who's going to be breaking in at least a couple new guys in that secondary. Obviously, you love DeAndre Baker, but opposite of Baker at the other cornerback spot and at the star position, that South Carolina secondary may give you some stuff to deal with, especially given the fact that Will Muschamp has been adamant about his desire to be more up-tempo with the offense here this season. We'll see how that plays out. We'll make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, one of the things I love doing every single day is our Dog Day Q&A. It's a chance to sort of be just a little looser, a little more off the cuff, a chance for you to influence the content in the program more. I love hearing your thoughts. For those of you that either listen to the podcast or listen on the radio, you're always good about tweeting me because you don't have the live comment option at DawgNation Daily, the best way for you to do that. For those of you who watch the show, you can put your comments in the comment section here on Facebook, YouTube. We'll even take some Twitter comments here, too. I love hearing your thoughts on the current state of Georgia football. And off the top of the show today, one of the things we talked about was the fact that a Bleacher Report writer thinks that Jake Fromm might be, along with Jacob Eason, one of the first 2 players taken in the 2020 NFL Draft. A really fascinating assessment of in Eason's case, a former Georgia quarterback, in Fromm's case, the presumptive starter here for this season. Really fascinating stuff, and I'm curious to find out what you think. Do you think that Jake Fromm will one day be a first-round pick? If that's true, then obviously changes the perception of Fromm in a big way. I think right now some non-Georgia fans or sort of media outside the DawgNation bubble might try to describe Jake Fromm as a bit of a game manager, a guy who is good as long as you don't ask him to do too much. But if one NFL scout's telling Bleacher Report he may be eventually a top 2 pick in the NFL draft, then you can scrap the game manager talk at that point in time. So y'all can weigh in on that in the comment section. Before we get some of those comments in, let me also squeeze this in as well. I am lucky here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, to have a huge group of people who help me get this show on the air every single day. One of the things I'm most proud of is the team that I get to work with. But the guy that's been with me the longest is Michael Shalaba. Now, if you've ever been to one of our DawgNation events, you've seen Michael. The glowing red hair is unmistakable. If you've not been to one of our events, if you haven't seen him in person, he looks just like Kevin Herter, who the Hawks just drafted in the first round of the NBA draft. That gives you a little context. Mike's been with me for a long time here. He helped to start the radio version of our program, helped to start the video version of our program. He has been invaluable to me, and today's his last day. Michael's moving up to New York City. He's going to be a big city guy here, and he's going to go on to great things, and he'll forget all about us. But I'll never forget him. I am super grateful for his contribution to DawgNation Daily, and I did want to take a moment to say thanks to him publicly for being both a good friend and a really, really good teammate here on DawgNation Daily every single day. Drew Miller also echoing that in the comment section, that we appreciate the entire team, Drew says, that puts DawgNation Daily together. And Drew, I really appreciate you joining me in that, because I am super proud of all these guys and gals who've done so much for us here. Ryan Wilbanks on the subject of Jake Fromm, and I told you guys these comments are pretty weird here. But he was weighing in on Jake Fromm. He thinks that Jake Fromm's going to be able to do big things here. It sounds like he thinks that Fromm has a chance to be a first-round pick eventually, which, once again, I mean, that changes everything about the conversation, both in terms of how you compare Fromm to Fields, how you compare Fromm to other SEC quarterbacks. I mean, something really big, to use that word we've used a couple times this week, at some point, Fromm is going to transcend the typical expectations if he really does meet what that draft scout told a Bleacher Report. It's going to be a fun thing to watch here. Eric Edwards, also on YouTube, says, people were sleeping on Fromm all of last season as well, like the Florida player that Swift bowled over. He's much more than a game manager, and growth could definitely be a first-round pick. I agree with the last sentiment there. I've never sort of bought into the notion that Fromm was just a game manager. That, to me, is not what he is. I think when he was asked to do big things, he made big throws. The yards per attempt stat sort of proves that out as much as anything. Bulldog Botanicals, also on YouTube, says Fromm will be a first-rounder. He will shock the football world this season, which will also be fun to watch here. And, listen, he's not the only good quarterback in the SEC. He's not the only good quarterback who's going to be vying for that kind of success, but I do think this is sort of an interesting counter to the typical conversation of Fromm that he's a good running back for a running-based team. I'm not quite so sure that Georgia plans on being as running-based as it has been in the past. We may see the quarterback highlighted a bit more for the Georgia offense in 2018. With that said, let's get ready to wrap up the show. All right, as we close up here today, a couple things to remind you of. One thing you already know, and one thing hopefully you never forget. I'll start with the Gator Countdown. 121 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We think the Dogs get another win against those lousy, stinking Gators. And as a commenter mentioned in our comment section a moment ago, Chauncey Gardner, what he said this past year, there's no doubt some Florida player is going to say something else this year, and there'll be more reason to get motivated. The idea of the blind squirrel may come up again, and, well, whatever it is, Georgia fans will use it as fuel, and we think the Dogs are celebrating when they leave Jacksonville. We believe that a good Georgia fan's a Gator hater, and 121 days from right now, Georgia gets a win against Florida again. Also, I guess, to a certain extent, bad recruiting news for Georgia yesterday. Legend Cavazos, the 2020 safety, just does choose Ohio State. I don't know if this was a surprise. I still think Georgia's going to be fine, but they did miss out on this young man, at least right here. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you with us right now, as we have said over and over again, we are out of order a bit today. So we just wrapped up the show, but there's still plenty of DawgNation Daily to come here. We'll try to squeeze in some of your comments here. Also, if Mike Griffith is ready, just give me the thumbs up. We'll get ready to roll with him. He's ready right now. Okay, Mike's ready to go. All right, that's good. So y'all know and love Mike Griffith. You've enjoyed hearing him on DawgNation Daily. He's got great insight on UGA. Let's get ready to welcome in Mike Griffith to the program right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Mike Griffith, it is a great privilege to get ready to talk to you about some Georgia football here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And one of the things that we were talking about right before you joined us was the state of the situation involving Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. And, Mike, you know what the conversation's kind of been around the SEC a bit when it comes to Fromm, and maybe some of this is national, that he is sort of a good quarterback for a running-based team, that he's, as a freshman, the kind of quarterback that could have some success as long as you didn't ask him to do too much. Now, I always felt like that Fromm was confounding those expectations maybe more than he got credit for a bit last season. Was not a perfect quarterback, had a couple blips on the radar here and there along the way. It's probably fair to point out he wasn't great on G-Day. But I've always felt like that he had the opportunity to sort of transcend being more than, you know, just a game manager. It sounds like at least one NFL scout, quoted by Bleacher Report, agrees that he may be a first-round pick at some point in time, maybe even in the 2020 draft there. How does all this land with you? I mean, do you think that Jake Fromm really does have, I guess, is he on track to sort of be more than just what some people might call kind of a game manager, don't ask him to do much style quarterback?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, being asked to do much, sometimes that means that other people aren't doing their jobs. I mean, it's not too long ago I was covering Josh Dobbs, and, he was asked to do too much. I'm sure he would have preferred to have the luxury to have the pass protection and open receivers that I see Georgia able to accomplish with their offense. And, with all the talent that Georgia, I mean, what do you really want the guy to do? I mean, he takes care of the football. He makes great pre-snap reads. He's got a good arm. He's got great mobility. I don't know where the game manager came from. I mean, this isn't Greg McElroy here. This guy can run for touchdowns. His game, his style, he reminds me a lot of Drew Brees, and I absolutely think he could be a first-round pick, Brandon.
So I think if we had a Fromm critic here, to be fair, I think the one thing that a Fromm critic might say is, well, you say, what do you want to see him do more of? The Fromm critic may say, I simply want to see him throw more. It is certainly true that when it comes to, like, passes per game, Georgia didn't rank very high a year ago. Total passing yards, Fromm didn't rank very high a year ago. I've always said that it's those yards per attempt that matters more than anything else. When he did throw, he threw in a very efficient manner. But that is, Mike, I think what the critic of Fromm would say. Let's see what happens when he's asked to throw more. In 2018, he may very well be asked to throw more. I think that is what the Fromm critic's sort of looking to see here.
Well, I mean, there's two audiences here. I mean, do you want to be the NFL audience and try and judge him for your fantasy football team, or do you want to be the Georgia audience and judge him for his ability to lead your program to a championship?
That's
when Steve Martin won a national title in '98, he wasn't completing 60% of his passes. In fact, I think he was about 7 for 19 passing when they beat Florida. I mean, this is about winning, and if I'm a football coach, I don't care about the statistics. I'm not going to ask Jake Fromm. I'm not going to put my quarterback at risk any more than I have to. And if I got Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and I'm throwing the ball 30 times, I'm not a very smart coach. So, these couch critics, to me, it sounds like they're looking for things to complain about. This guy was a tremendous leader. He made good decisions. It was a high percentage offense that didn't turn the ball over much. They took care of their defense. Everybody wants to see the ball thrown around, and then you get to November and half your roster's injured and you wonder why. And it's because you're running 90 to 100 plays a game on offense. Well, guess what? That means your defense is on the field 25% more than they would be if you're able to run the ball and control the clock. So Kirby Smart's not interested in the statistics, the numbers. So there's plenty of time for Jake Fromm to be evaluated as an NFL quarterback. But as a college quarterback, there was none better in the nation. He was the quarterback on the best college football team in the country last year.
Yeah, I think that that's all really well said, Mike. I think that's a really good point. Speaking of Fromm, when we had Mike Johnson on the show, my partner from SEC Country Live, earlier in the week, he was talking about some of the off-season workout stuff we've seen from Fromm. He's been at the Manning Passing Academy. We've seen some photos emerge of Justin Fields kind of doing some of the same kind of stuff. He was recently photographed with Deshaun Watson in the middle of some private drills together. Now, these are snapshots. They don't tell the full picture, but to the extent that we sort of, believe these snapshots to be representative of what's happening for the entire summer, it sort of seems to sort of project the image that the quarterbacks are kind of setting the tone for the team in terms of off-season workouts. Mike, as a former offensive lineman, said, hey, that really means a lot. When you've got the quarterbacks who are out there honing their craft, getting better each and every day, when they're not just being, pretty boys and sort of strutting around and enjoying the celebrity lifestyle, when they're really grinding and doing the hard work, that just lifts the entire team. Would you agree with Mike on that token?
Absolutely. I mean, the off season. That's when championships really are won in the off season. How much work are these guys doing on their own? How is Fields fitting in? It's Jake Fromm's offense. I understand recruiting hype, and look, recruiting coverage is so important. And obviously, DawgNation has the absolute best in Jeff Sentell, and Fields is every bit as good as people think. But he's coming into a team that has a quarterback, and he's going to need to wait for an opportunity. Either Fromm needs to have a really bad day or an injury. Otherwise, what we're really talking about is another option at quarterback. And I'm sure that that's what's happening, that chemistry. How are these guys getting along? How are the teammates responding to them? But I have no doubt that Fromm's putting the work in. To me, it's an exciting time for Georgia fans. And I know a big conversation, Brandon, the hangover, losing the game. No, listen, this football team is still hungry. And this football coach, as he said to me in Destin, he's not going to get beat by Alabama twice. And if you walk around dragging your jaw on the ground because you're upset about January, then you really, you wouldn't have much space in Kirby Smart's locker room, because these guys their eyes are locked forward, and the talk is about this season, what they've got to do to get back, and what they got to do to finish the job. Georgia football, Brandon, has unfinished business.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I love your point about the hunger that Georgia may have this offseason. I think that's one of the cool things about Fields. And as you kind of pointed out, to kind of follow up on the point you're making, it sort of remains to be seen how much Fields is truly going to play in 2018. But if he indeed is doing the kind of, pre-practice work that it appears that he's doing, he's probably already a cultural fit. We'll find out what he looks like when he actually starts practicing, actually starts playing games. But at least for now, for a Georgia team that you described as hungry, it seems like Fields may already be a pretty good cultural fit for that.
Well, absolutely. There's a reason he went to Georgia. He wants to win a championship. And, this guy's a leader, and this guy's been a great football player, and he understands it. He understands the aspects of the competition. Absolutely, they're going to compete every day. Absolutely, he's going to try and push Fromm. But, it's got to be a mature competition and not one that damages the team and not one that divides the locker room. That's not going to happen on this Georgia team. The players won't let that happen again. They know what they left on the field. It's in the back of their minds. There's nothing they can do about it. They can't get beat twice by Alabama. They can't let it affect their workouts in a negative way. All the concentration and focus has to be moving forward. And it's a great quarterback situation for Georgia. There's no doubt about it. But, Fromm is a guy that, it's fascinating to me. And maybe it shouldn't be in this day and age of social media where everybody has an opinion. But it's fascinating that a negative opinion could grow legs on this guy. I just got off a conference call. We were discussing a freshman All-American team and some awards that came out of it. And, if there was a freshman All-American player of the year last year,
Fromm would have been one of 2 or 3 finalists. I mean, we're talking about perhaps the best freshman in the country, and certainly one of the top quarterbacks in the country. What he did was amazing, and like I said, so to hear some of the criticism or the skepticism and about his play, it makes me just a little surprised, because the Georgia fan base is certainly knowledgeable. They know their game, but I think we're really hearing from the fantasy football NFL people that want to see bigger passing numbers without taking into consideration what that does to the defense, the risk that it puts Fromm at, and the percentages and how they drop when you're not able to run the ball effectively versus throwing the ball.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that any of that criticism is coming from sort of outside the bubble of DawgNation, more so than certainly from within it, the people who are watching Fromm most closely every single Saturday. Let me shift gears here for a moment, because one of the themes that we've dealt with a lot here on our program is things that Georgia fans may know that the national media may be about to find out about. And as we say all the time, for the people who write these magazines and for the people who do the online stuff, they can't know every single thing about every single team in college football. There's an extent to which they have to sort of use conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom for Georgia would say, well, if you lost Isaiah Wynn as left tackle, who was a first-round pick in the NFL, then seemingly the offensive line is not going to be quite as good here this upcoming season. That's just sort of conventional wisdom. Yet, Mike, I think Georgia fans would say you slide over Andrew Thomas, who's a giant and a former elite prospect. You bring in Isaiah Wilson potentially as a starter at right tackle now. He's also a former 5-star prospect. You've got Ben Cleveland solidly at right guard. He's a former 5-star prospect. You may have a freshman start at left guard who is also a former 5-star prospect. I think there's a belief amongst a lot of Georgia fans this offensive line in 2018 is going to be certainly bigger than the one a year ago, also probably better here. And the belief is that Georgia, breaking in new running backs, going to lean heavily on that. For Fromm, taking the maturity and the growth from year 1 to year 2, he's also going to lean on that bigger offensive line as well. How much do you think beefier, bigger offensive lineman really does benefit Georgia here in 2018?
You also mentioned, you didn't mention Ben Cleveland, Solomon. You go on and on. Lamont Gilliard, the number of guys, size that the run of the group. Gilliard at 308. I mean, you're right. The size, the way they're able to just wear down opponents, and so much of this is going to have to do, I think, with who the backs are. And there's a lot of questions about the running backs, and who can get it done. Can Swift go between the tackles? I mean, I haven't seen a lot of that yet. I wonder a lot about Zamir White. James Cook, to me, is he going to when's he going to get in camp? I mean, this could be an impact player. So I think you've got to answer your questions about your playmakers. Who are your playmakers? Do you have the guys that can pound the ball between the tackles to get those 3, 4, 5, 6 yards, wear teams out, and keep you ahead of the chains in good down and distance situations so Fromm can operate effectively in that pass game with some high percentage throws and pick defenses apart that are having to guess, that are dealing with 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3. And is Georgia running or are they throwing? As long as you keep those defenses in a 50-50 situation, they can't load up on you. Makes it really hard on those coordinators, especially when you got a guy like Jake who can go to the line and make the call. I mean, what is the guy, 19 going on 30 right now? His ability to pick apart defenses and get Georgia in the right place is the whole key to this machine. No doubt that having a jumbo line with power gives Georgia a lot of great options. It makes everything better. Conversely, a bad offensive line makes everything worse. So to me, right now, it's about figuring out those skill position players who can do what under the bright light. And that's where Georgia has to find its way early with that South Carolina game moving early.
You mentioned James Cook a moment ago, and we actually talked about that before you joined us here today. Kind of a unique subplot to watch play out with the pecking order of these running backs. James Cook was obviously a highly regarded prospect in the 2018 class. Zamir White was too. We don't know yet how healthy White is. The assumption is he's probably going to be pretty healthy based on some of the whispers that kind of come out from time to time. But as you know, Mike, Elijah Holyfield's been biding his time for a while. Brian Harrion, another guy who wasn't as highly regarded coming out of high school but has played well when given a chance for Georgia, is also biding his time. For a guy like you that likes writing good stories, I imagine getting a chance to sink your teeth in and cover this eventual pecking order of running backs. Now, I didn't mention DeAndre Swift, who's likely to eventually be, obviously the bell cow there, but in terms of the complementary guys behind him, I imagine this is going to be a pretty fun story to watch unfold here this summer and then throughout the fall too, right?
Well, I've got a pretty high bar on running backs, Brandon. I mean, I've been fortunate to cover, the greatest. I mean, I started my career covering the Detroit Lions, very early in college, and Barry Sanders, and then it was on to Sean Alexander and Jamal Lewis and Travis Henry and Arian Foster, Le'Veon Bell at Michigan State. And these Georgia backs all look good, but I don't see anybody of that caliber that would belong in that discussion yet. I need to see more. Harrion has got a lot of juice, and I like what he. But I'm talking about a down. I want to know who the down-out workhorse. I mean, Swift doesn't have a 100-yard game yet, and I've seen him, and I don't know what he does between the tackles. I mean, can he be that guy, that first, second down guy? Like I said, on video, just strictly looking on video, Cook is a guy they got to get in. I mean, that guy to me, I like his juice. I like his vision. Obviously, Zamir White and what he did, I want to know the competition level. There could be another great back emerge from Georgia, but as I look, I don't see that from Swift yet. To be fair, he hasn't had the chance to be the man. He'll get his chance this year, to show what he can do as a first down, second down back. But I don't see that. To me, that's an unknown for Georgia. There's a lot of good options, but it remains to be seen if there's a great answer.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to watch play out here this summer and into the fall. Real quick final thing to get to you with here. I saw where ESPN had J.R. Reed rated as Georgia's most underrated player for 2018. And obviously we've talked a lot about Reed here this offseason because he's actually gotten some attention. He's shown up as a preseason All-American. He's been preseason All-SEC on some lists. If you're getting that kind of like preseason love for awards lists and things like that, do you truly qualify as underrated if you're J.R. Reed?
Well, there's a lot of award lists, and we can kind of pick which award we're talking about. I got to be careful when we say ESPN. They got about 150 writers, so to me, it's always which ESPN writer said it. I mean, they might have some intern from Saratoga, New York, doing it that day. I don't know. There's a big difference between that
sure.
and maybe like a Chris Lowe or a Mark Slabaugh or somebody like that. Now if they're putting it out. That's some pretty good juice. So I always hesitate to overreact to lists. I think there's a lot of people that are going to say that Georgia's overrated. There's a lot of non-believers that want to say that Georgia choked and that they can't get it done because that's been the MO for Georgia, even under Mark Richt. Close, but not close enough. And, that's what whets the appetite of the Georgia football team and Kirby Smart. They know they've got that tag. But I'm telling you, Brandon, they were the best team in college football last year, and in my opinion, Alabama shouldn't have even been in the playoff. They didn't even win their division. You take the name off of the jersey, and they don't get in the college football playoff. So this isn't college basketball where it's whoever gets the hottest at the end of the year. At least it shouldn't be, But it is what it is, and Alabama won that football game. Georgia may win it 7 out of 10, but Alabama won it that night. And now Georgia's got a lot to prove still, and they've got some new players competing for spots, a lot of talent, and a coaching staff that's got a proven model. And also, I think, a quarterback that I would really trust. I mean, think about it. If you were going to say that quarterbacks were airplane pilots, who would you trust more to fly your plane than Jake Fromm going into this season?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike, and a great way to leave this discussion. Fascinating stuff. We look forward to reading plenty of you at DawgNation.com coming up really soon. Thanks for being a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza here today, and we'll, of course, talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith, who you can check out at DawgNation.com. Coming up very soon as a writer. Already making an appearance here on DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. That's really good stuff. For those of you that wonder, what in the world are we doing? Why are we kind of out of order here? I know many of you sort of joined the show late. We had to go a little out of order today to accommodate a scheduling issue there. But tomorrow we'll be back sort of in our regular format with a lot of comments here at the end. Let me see if I can just grab one or two more before I get out of here. And I guess I'm about to just have to declare Facebook comment bankruptcy. I cannot follow these Facebook comments at all anymore. I have no idea. I've got my mouse here today, trying to make it easier. It is just a colossal mess. So if I'm missing your Facebook comment, I certainly apologize for that. Jermaine Dunbar Trucking mentions, what about the wide receivers? And obviously in that conversation about Fromm and how good he's going to be and how all these offensive pieces fit together for this season, the wide receivers do become a pretty significant part of that. And there's a lot of optimism among many Georgia fans about Terry Godwin and McCole Hardman. I know that Hardman showed up, at least in terms of some offseason attention, as a potential kick return All-American, punt return All-American, and Georgia fans also want to see him do that at the wide receiver level here this season. We know that he was close to some huge catches a year ago, made some big catches. also close to a few more. And I think there's a lot of Georgia fans who think he's going to haul a bunch more of those in here in 2018, to say nothing of how Riley Ridley, who showed flashes during the national championship game, what he might bring to the table. It's one of those deals where there are a lot of pieces, and we did this a lot last offseason, and we would always admit, you start mentioning, Werner and Nod and all the tight ends and all the running backs. There's still just one football. There is still a pecking order that's going to be established, and somebody, a fan favorite, either running back or wide receiver, is not going to get as many touches as people want them to get. But nonetheless, it is going to be a fun thing to watch play out. We're back tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you missed a portion of today's broadcast, or if you want to hear what it sounds like when we sort of put it all back together in the right order, we'll have the podcast coming up for you on all the various podcast channels and on the radio at noon here in about an hour on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Jeff Sintel will be with us. We'll beat him over the head with some more D-Rob questions probably. We'll find out what's next for Georgia after missing out on the 2020 safety legend Cavazos, and we'll have some fun. After all, we're getting ready for the 4th of July. We're here every day next week, but Wednesday, by the way. I'll tell you more about that when it gets a little closer. For now, though, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza.